The rain had stopped hours ago, but the smell of wet earth lingered through the open window. The clock on the nightstand glowed softly 2:47 a.m. Helen Crawford stirred, half dreaming, when she heard a sound from the hallway, a muffled voice, then another, her husband's. Victor's office door was slightly ajar, a thin slice of light cutting through the dark corridor. Helen slid from bed, her bare feet quiet on the wooden floor. His voice carried low but eager. "It's all arranged," he whispered. "After the celebration, she'll sign. Don't worry, it will be clean." There was a pause. Then came the faint crackle of an older woman's laughter. Helen froze. She knew that laugh. Eleanor Crawford, her mother-in-law. "Just make sure she doesn't see it coming, darling," Eleanor said through the speaker. 30 years is long enough. She's had a good run." Helen's stomach tightened. She stood motionless, the dim light from the office reflecting against the framed photos on the wall, wedding pictures, family holidays, their son Ryan's graduation. She listened as Victor ended the call and sighed contentedly. A chair scraped, the light snapped off, and footsteps headed toward the bedroom. Helen hurried back under the covers, her heart thudding. Victor slipped in beside her, his cologne strong and unfamiliar. He lay on his back, wide awake, breathing too evenly for sleep. Helen stared at the ceiling, eyes open in the dark. By morning, he was a different man, cheerful, affectionate, almost rehearsed. "Morning, beautiful," he said, kissing her cheek. "You were asleep so deeply last night." He made her coffee, brought breakfast to the table, and even suggested they drive to Baltimore that weekend to celebrate their upcoming 30th anniversary. Helen stirred her cup slowly, studying him. His movements were smooth, practiced, his smile slightly too bright. "Baltimore?" she asked. "That's new." "I just thought we should do something special. You deserve it." It wasn't the words that bothered her, it was the tone. The same tone he used when sealing a business deal. The one that always meant he had already decided everything. When he left for work, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a reminder, "Call L at 11 a.m. She frowned. L? He never used initials for clients. That afternoon, she asked casually while watering her plants, "Who's L? Someone from your office?" Victor turned too quickly. For a second, panic flickered in his eyes, but he smiled right after. "Leo, my project manager. He's helping me with the event arrangements." His left hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. It was small, but Helen knew that tremor, it was his tell when he lied. "Of course," she said quietly, returning to her plants. When the door closed behind him, she stayed still for a long moment, listening to the echo of her own breathing. Outside, gray clouds drifted over the Chesapeake Bay. The water shimmered, calm and secretive, just like the life she had been living. Something was coming, and this time, Helen decided, she wouldn't look away. 2 days later, Helen heard the front gate click open. She looked out the window and saw a familiar silhouette, Eleanor Crawford, dressed immaculately in cream, her silver hair pinned perfectly, holding a bottle of wine and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Helen, darling," she said the moment Helen opened the door. "You didn't answer my call. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd drop by." Eleanor never just dropped by. She entered as if inspecting the place, her eyes sweeping over every detail of Helen's living room. The art books stacked on the table, the ceramic vases Helen had made herself, the framed portrait of their late dog by the fireplace. "You've kept this old house quite cozy," she murmured, "though it must be hard, maintaining it alone when Victor is always so busy." Helen smiled politely. "It's my home, Eleanor. I don't mind the work." Eleanor's lips twitched. "Your home? Yes. But technically, both of yours, isn't it?" She sipped her wine, watching Helen over the rim of the glass. "By the way, where do you keep the deed? These old buildings can be risky if something unexpected happens. Fire, illness, sudden, change." The words were casual, but the meaning wasn't lost. Helen felt the chill creep up her spine. "Everything important is safe," she replied, her tone neutral. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Eleanor said lightly, standing to admire the bay view. "You never know what the future brings, especially when men your husband's age start thinking about legacy. Legacy. The word hung between them like a warning. That evening, Victor came home humming, the smell of his cologne richer, more expensive, filling the hallway. He handed Helen a small box. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings. "For you?" he said. "Just because." She studied his face. The man she had spent 30 years with could still act the part of the loving husband flawlessly. But she saw something else behind his smile, nervous excitement, as if he were waiting for her to fall into a trap he had set. "Thank you," she said, closing the box gently. "They're beautiful." When he stepped into the shower, Helen walked to his desk. His tablet blinked with notifications. She hesitated only a moment before typing their old wedding date, reversed, 031095. It unlocked. Her chest tightened. The browsing history scrolled like a confession. How to remove spouse from property title, Maryland. Luxury engagement rings, Baltimore. Discreet divorce attorney near me. Then came the emails. One stood out. From Laura Jensen, Victor's new marketing assistant. "Dinner was wonderful. You make me feel alive again." Counting the days until the announcement. Helen sat perfectly still, the glow of the tablet screen lighting her face. Announcement? What announcement? She turned off the screen, placed it back exactly as she'd found it, and went to the kitchen. Her reflection in the dark window stared back, steady, cold, no longer uncertain. Whatever this announcement was, she knew it wasn't love he planned to declare. And she promised herself, when the moment came, she would be ready. By the next morning, Helen's grief had turned into a calm, sharp focus. She no longer felt confusion, only clarity. Years of observing human nature through art and literature had taught her one truth. When people start plotting, it's not emotion, but preparation that wins the war. She called Nina Torres, a former student she had mentored years ago, who had since become a respected family lawyer in Baltimore. "Nina, it's Helen Crawford," she said over the phone. "I'd like to buy you lunch. There's something I need your advice on." They met at a quiet cafe overlooking the water. Nina looked worried as soon as Helen explained. "You suspect he's planning a divorce behind your back?" Helen nodded. "Worse, I believe he's trying to take the house." Nina pulled out her laptop, her professional instinct kicking in. "When was the house purchased?" "My father gave it to me in 1992, 3 years before I married Victor," Helen said. "His name was added later, but only for appearances. I paid for every renovation myself." Nina's brows lifted. "Then, legally, it's your separate property. Even if his name appears on the title, it was a premarital gift. In Maryland, that matters." Helen exhaled slowly. The tension in her chest loosened. For the first time in weeks, she felt grounded. Nina leaned forward. "Helen, listen carefully. Do not confront him yet. Let him think you know nothing. Gather evidence, emails, text messages, transfers, everything. Then, when the time comes, you won't need anger. You'll have proof." Helen nodded. "That's exactly what I intend to do." Over the next few days, she moved with silent precision. She set up a small recorder in Victor's office drawer, where he often spoke to his mother by phone. One night, as she pretended to read in the living room, she heard the faint sound of voices through the slightly open door. Victor's voice. "After the celebration, she'll sign the papers. Langford says it'll be simple once she's humiliated in front of everyone." Eleanor's voice followed, pleased. "Good. People will understand you had no choice. It's time you started fresh, with someone who can give you children, or at least attention." Helen pressed the recorder off and tucked it away, her pulse steady. The next morning, she visited her bank. "I'd like to open a personal account," she said firmly. "Private." She transferred $60,000 from their joint account, an amount Victor would hardly notice among his business transactions. That afternoon, she received a letter from Vermont, a certified envelope with her Aunt Rose's seal. Her aunt had passed peacefully, leaving Helen her entire estate, a lakeside cottage, a trust fund, and nearly $2.4 million in bonds. Helen sat at her desk for a long time, reading the letter twice, tears of gratitude welling in her eyes. She whispered to the empty room, "You always believed in me, Aunt Rose. Thank you." She placed the inheritance papers inside a folder labeled Truth. When Victor came home later that night, humming a tune and smelling of another woman's perfume, Helen greeted him with a smile so gentle he didn't notice the quiet strength behind it. Let him plan his spectacle, she thought. He was the architect of his own downfall, he just didn't know it yet. A week later, Victor came home with a gleam in his eyes Helen hadn't seen in years. "I've planned something special for our anniversary," he announced proudly. "A grand celebration at the Harborview Hotel in Baltimore. It's time we make a statement." "A statement?" Helen asked softly, folding laundry in the sunroom. "Yes," he said, pacing as if rehearsing a speech. 30 years of marriage deserves recognition. Clients, friends, investors, they'll all be there. You'll love it." She smiled faintly. "I'm sure I will." When he left for the evening, claiming a late business meeting, Helen drove to Baltimore and parked near the Harborview Hotel. The city lights shimmered on the water as she stepped inside. The scent of polished wood and orchids filled the lobby. "Good evening," said the banquet manager, a cheerful woman in a dark blazer. "Can I help you?" "I'm Mrs. Crawford," Helen said gently. "My husband booked a ballroom here for an anniversary party." The manager's eyes brightened. "Ah, yes, the Crawfords. Quite the event. 120 guests, live jazz, 6-course dinner, all prepaid." She lowered her voice. "Mr. Crawford insisted on top-tier everything, $70,000 total. He wanted it perfect." Helen's expression didn't change, but her heart grew cold. 70,000 from their joint account for her own humiliation. "I'd like to see the ballroom," she said. The manager led her into a spacious hall glowing with chandeliers. Tables were arranged in silver and ivory. The stage centered under a massive crystal light. Helen noticed a microphone stand placed right at the middle of the room. She asked casually, "Where will the speeches be made?" "Right there," the manager said proudly. Mr. Crawford said it would be the highlight of the night. Helen's gaze lingered on that microphone. For a moment, she could almost hear his voice rehearsing lies, but she also pictured herself standing there, calm and composed, her truth louder than his deception. As she turned to leave, she heard a familiar voice from across the lobby. "Oh, Vic, it's stunning," a woman said. Helen froze. She recognized the laugh. At the reception desk stood Laura Jensen, tall, blonde, dressed in a white silk blouse, her manicured hand resting casually on Victor's arm as they reviewed the seating chart together. Helen approached slowly. "Good evening," she said evenly. Laura turned, startled. "Oh, Mrs. Crawford, I didn't know you'd be here." "I imagine you didn't," Helen replied, her tone polite but cool. "I was curious about the arrangements. You seem very involved." Victor stammered. "Laura's just helping with logistics. She's efficient." "I can see that," Helen said. Her eyes met Laura's briefly, steady, calm, unreadable. "You've done beautiful work. Thank you." Without another word, she left the lobby. That night, as the moonlight rippled over the bay outside their home, Helen sat at her desk and opened a plain white envelope. Inside was a card that had arrived earlier that afternoon from attorney Peter Langford, a divorce lawyer known for representing wealthy men. It read, "For Mrs. Helen Crawford complimentary consultation, courtesy of Mrs. Eleanor Crawford." Helen stared at it for a moment, then smiled to herself. "So it's a family production," she whispered. She placed the card into her folder marked Truth, alongside her inheritance documents, property deed, and bank statements. Then she looked toward the calendar, April 14, their anniversary. In 10 days, the curtain would rise, and for once, she would be the one directing the show. The night of April 14th arrived, with a kind of brightness that only hides storms beneath it. The Harborview Hotel glowed against the Baltimore skyline, its glass walls reflecting hundreds of glittering lights from the water below. Inside the grand ballroom, a live jazz band played soft melodies while guests in elegant attire mingled and raised their glasses. Helen stood near the entrance, her navy silk gown simple yet striking, her silver hair pinned neatly, her expression unreadable. People greeted her warmly, unaware of the chaos about to unfold. "Mrs. Crawford, congratulations," a colleague of Victor's said. 30 years remarkable." Helen smiled politely. "It's certainly been memorable." Across the room, she spotted Victor laughing near the stage, his arm resting casually around Eleanor's chair. Laura stood nearby in a pale champagne dress that shimmered under the lights, her confidence barely disguised as modesty. She looked young, radiant, victorious. Eleanor glanced around proudly. "My son has always had a sense for presentation," she said to a nearby guest. "He wanted to honor his wife properly. Honor her." Helen could almost laugh. Dinner flowed, champagne glasses clinked, and the murmur of polite conversation filled the room. Then, as dessert was served, the MC tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "may I have your attention, please? Mr. Victor Crawford would like to say a few words in celebration of 30 years with his beloved wife." Applause rippled through the tables as Victor rose, his smile broad and rehearsed. He adjusted his tie, took the microphone, and began. "Thank you, everyone," he said warmly. "Tonight is special. 30 years, 3 decades beside one person, it's no small thing. But with time, life changes us. We grow, we evolve, and sometimes we must be honest about where those changes lead." A few guests exchanged puzzled glances. Helen sat still, her hands folded on her lap. "For years," Victor continued, "I have been grateful for Helen's loyalty and patience. She's been a good partner, but lately our paths have diverged. We want different things. It's nobody's fault, it's just life." Eleanor dabbed her eyes delicately with a handkerchief. Laura stood near the corner, pretending surprise yet unable to hide the faint curl of a smile. Victor's tone grew bolder. "So, tonight, I want to thank Helen for everything. But I also want to share something new. I've found joy again. I've found someone who reminds me what it means to feel alive." Gasps spread across the ballroom. The music stopped. Somewhere in the back, a glass shattered. Helen didn't move. Her gaze met his calmly as he said, "This isn't an end, it's a new beginning for both of us. Helen will soon have time to travel, to paint, to rest. And I'll be moving forward with someone who shares my dreams for the future." The silence in the room was deafening. All eyes turned toward her. Some guests looked horrified, others confused. Laura lowered her eyes, feigning embarrassment. Eleanor smiled, satisfied. Helen took a sip of her champagne, set the glass down gently, and rose from her seat. Her movements were slow, deliberate, graceful. She walked to the center of the ballroom and reached for the microphone in Victor's hand. For a moment, he looked startled, unsure whether she would cry, shout, or faint. But her voice was steady, calm, and perfectly clear. "Thank you, Victor," she said softly. "You're right, it's time for honesty." The room fell utterly still. Shall we tell them the whole truth? The microphone in Helen's hand felt surprisingly light. The air in the ballroom was thick enough to touch, every whisper silenced as the guests leaned forward. Victor's confident grin faltered as she turned to face the crowd, her calmness more unnerving than anger could ever be. "You're right, Victor," Helen began, her voice even, almost gentle. "After 30 years, we do deserve honesty, but not just your version." A nervous laugh rippled somewhere near the back, quickly dying. Helen's gaze swept across the room, meeting each pair of curious eyes. "First," she said, "I want to thank everyone for coming. My husband spared no expense to make this night unforgettable. $70,000, wasn't it?" She looked at Victor, whose face tightened. "Paid entirely from our joint account. I suppose it's fitting. After all, it's not every day a man spends that much money to humiliate his wife in public." Gasps broke through the room. Eleanor's face drained of color. Victor stepped forward, stammering, "Helen, that's enough." She held up a hand, her tone still calm. "No, darling, you wanted transparency. Let's finish the story." From her purse, she drew a slim folder of documents and laid them on the podium. "You see, this house he plans to sell fairly? It's not his to sell. My father gave me our Annapolis townhouse before our marriage. It's a premarital gift, legally mine. Victor was simply added later for convenience. I have the deed and verification here, signed, dated, and certified. A hush fell so deep that the only sound was the faint hum of the chandelier lights. Victor's lips parted in disbelief. That's not true. Oh, but it is, she said softly, flipping a page. And since you enjoy surprises, here's another. Last month, I received an inheritance from my late aunt in Vermont. $2,400,000 in bonds, plus an estate by the lake. I didn't tell you because, frankly, you'd already shown me who you were. A wave of murmurs rolled through the guests. A few began recording discreetly. Helen's eyes found Laura's across the room. As for the young woman who has brought light back into your life, Laura, was it? The necklace you're wearing was purchased on our joint credit card. I do hope you kept the receipt. I'll be filing for reimbursement. Laura's face flushed crimson as the crowd turned toward her. She tried to speak, but her voice failed. Helen continued, her tone unwavering. So, to clarify, I'm not the one being left behind. I'm simply reclaiming what's always been mine. And Victor, your debts, your loans, your new beginning, they're yours alone. I have my own. Eleanor rose shakily, voice trembling. You're embarrassing the family. Helen looked at her with a small, sad smile. No, Eleanor, I'm liberating it. Applause started from one corner of the room, hesitant at first, then spreading. Guests clapped, some even cheering. Victor stood frozen, pale and sweating under the lights. Helen placed the microphone gently on the podium, her expression serene. You can all stay and enjoy the champagne, she said, turning toward the exit. My husband paid for it. And with that, she walked out of the ballroom, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, each step an ending and a beginning. Behind her, the sound of applause swelled into something like thunder. The moment the ballroom doors closed behind Helen, the applause dissolved into chaos. Guests murmured, some shouting questions, others hurrying to record the aftermath. Victor stood frozen at the podium, still gripping the microphone like a man clutching a lifeline. Ladies and gentlemen, he stammered, you've misunderstood. This isn't what it looks like. But the crowd wasn't buying it. His boss, Mr. Grant, a stoic man in his 60s, rose from his table. Victor, I think we understood perfectly, he said coldly. You used company funds to entertain your mistress and humiliate your wife. I can't imagine how we recover from this. Victor tried to protest, but Grant turned to leave, disgusted. We'll discuss your resignation first thing Monday. Across the room, Laura's face was pale. She attempted to slip toward the exit, but a group of guests blocked her path. One of them, an old friend of Helen's, crossed her arms. Leaving so soon, dear? I'd stay and watch the fireworks if I were you. Laura spun around, flustered. This isn't my fault. He said they were separated. He told me she was cold and distant. Eleanor shot up from her chair, pointing a trembling finger. You ruined my son's life. Laura let out a bitter laugh. Ruined? He promised to marry me after tonight. He promised I'd move into that fancy townhouse by next month. She turned toward Victor, her voice cracking. Was any of it real? Victor's silence was answer enough. The crowd gasped, cameras flashing, phones held high. Someone whispered, "It's going viral already." In the chaos, Eleanor staggered back into her chair, her pearl necklace rattling against the glass. "You fool!" she hissed at her son. "You've destroyed everything, our name, our business, our reputation." Victor rubbed his forehead, his voice low. "I just wanted to be happy." "Happy?" Eleanor snapped. "You were married to a woman who made you respectable. You traded her for a scandal." Laura's face hardened. "Respectable? You two plotted against her. Don't make me the villain in this." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "You think I don't know about the loans, Victor? The credit cards? You said you needed money for projects, but it was all for this circus. You owe nearly $80,000. Eleanor's head jerked toward him. "Loans? You told me everything was covered." "I thought I could fix it," Victor muttered weakly. But the crowd wasn't interested in excuses anymore. They were filming, whispering, laughing quietly in disbelief. The mighty Victor Crawford, the man who bragged of wealth and power, now stood sweating in shame beneath the chandeliers he had paid for. By the next morning, clips of Helen's speech filled every corner of social media. Maryland woman turns tables at anniversary party. He cheated, she mic dropped. Wife exposes husband live. Within 48 hours, Victor's firm issued a statement. Effective immediately, Victor Crawford has been removed from all leadership positions. Eleanor's investors withdrew from her family business, citing ethical concerns. She was forced to sell her estate and move into a smaller property in Towson. As for Laura, she resigned from Victor's company before she could be fired. 2 weeks later, she vanished. Rumor said she had taken a job out of state. And Victor? He returned to an empty house, the same house he once called his empire. The locks had been changed. On the front door was a note in Helen's graceful handwriting. All keys returned, all debts yours, H. He sat on the porch for a long time that night, staring at the Chesapeake Bay in silence. The water was calm, indifferent, endless. Somewhere miles away, Helen was sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. 6 months later, the Maryland air had turned crisp and golden. Leaves swirled along the path leading to Cedar House, the art retreat Helen had opened near Deep Creek Lake. The smell of pine and paint filled the old converted farmhouse, where women of all ages gathered to learn, talk, and heal. Helen stood by the wide windows, watching the afternoon sunlight spill across the lake. Laughter echoed from the next room, students shaping clay, sketching water scenes, sharing stories over tea. Every sound felt like music, a reminder that life could begin again at any age. Her assistant, a young woman named Naomi, entered with the letter. "This came for you, Mrs. Crawford, from Baltimore." Helen took it calmly, recognizing the careful, hesitant handwriting. It was from Victor. She opened it and read, "Helen, I don't expect forgiveness. I lost everything I built, my firm, my reputation, the home we shared. I'm driving for a delivery company now, living in a small apartment with my mother. Every night I think of how foolish I was. You were my anchor, and I let greed pull me away. I hope you found peace. You deserve it." Helen folded the letter quietly and set it aside. Her heart felt neither anger nor triumph, only a quiet certainty that she had chosen the right path. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, she walked outside to the dock. The lake glimmered like glass, the air filled with the earthy scent of autumn. She held a mug of tea in her hands and breathed deeply. Nina had visited the month before to finalize the last of the legal details. The court had ruled the Annapolis townhouse as Helen's sole premarital property. Victor was ordered to repay his personal debts. Helen had declined alimony, saying she wanted nothing more from him, not money, not explanations. Now she had her freedom, her inheritance, and something greater, her peace. As the sky deepened into violet, one of her students, a widow named Lorraine, joined her on the dock. "Mrs. Crawford," she said softly, "I heard a little of your story. Does it ever stop hurting?" Helen smiled faintly. "Yes, it does. But not because you forget. It stops hurting when you stop needing to prove anything, when you realize that dignity is louder than revenge." Lorraine nodded, her eyes glistening. "You make it sound easy." Helen looked out at the horizon. "It isn't. It's a choice you make every morning to wake up, to breathe, to keep your heart clean even when others tried to dirty it." The two women stood together as the last light touched the water. In the quiet, Helen thought of all that had happened, the betrayal, the whispers, the microphone, the storm that had once threatened to destroy her. It all felt distant now, like a painting she had already signed and framed. Her voice in the wind was steady and full of calm strength. "He wanted someone younger. I chose someone wiser myself. Betrayal didn't end my story. It gave me back my voice." The camera of life might have closed on that ballroom months ago, but for Helen Crawford, the real story had only just begun. Time doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. Power isn't about revenge, it's about self-respect. When you know your worth, no one can take it from you. And under the golden Maryland sky, Helen finally knew. The truth, spoken with grace, was the most beautiful masterpiece she would ever create.